In the dark pagan past of Ireland, St. Patrick entered an ancient pagan temple. It had 12 standing stones, each representing one of the different gods of Ireland. In the center was a great stone head, the head of Crom Cruach. And while he stood there, he heard the demons hissing from the stone. He knew what he must do. He made the sign of the cross, and the demons rushed out of the statues in fear, and the statues all broke and crumbled to the ground as piles of broken rock. And thus St. Patrick drove Crom Cruach for land of Ireland. Or so the story goes. Crom is an interesting character, and so is St. Patrick. This story doesn't appear until very late in the legend of St. Patrick. It gets tacked on. It's actually not in his own autobiography. What actually happened here? Who was Crom Cruach? And what is the relationship between Patrick and the Druids anyway? Let's talk about that as we walk together down creation paths. Hello, everyone. My name is Charlie. I am a Christo-Pagan Druid and priest of Bridget.
Hello, everyone. My name is Brian. I'm a Christo-Pagan Druid and sous chef to the Dog Dough.
If that name of Crom Cruach sounds familiar to you, but you can't quite place it, are you a fan of the Conan the Barbarian movies? The ones with Arnold Schwarzenegger? By Crom. He was technically a Hyperborean, a Cimmerian, and he interrelated with Robert E. Howard's ideas of the Celtic pantheon a little bit, but not really. So that might be where you're hearing it from. You might be hearing Arnold Schwarzenegger in the back of your head saying, by Crom. I'm not even going to try to do an Arnold on here.
I was half expecting you to go, St. Patrick and Conan have so much in common.
Yes.
Kind of imagining this very beefy version of St. Patrick, which is not exactly the image of the type of person I have in my head for him.
They're both literary characters that have a lot of fan fiction written about them. But before we get into all that, if you haven't already, don't forget to like, subscribe, follow, whatever the terminology happens to be on whatever app you're listening to us on. We do 5 original Christo-Pagan and Druid episodes Monday through Friday, and you don't want to miss a thing because we've got a lot of interesting stuff coming up. All right. I have issues with this story on so many levels. One, let's just get the bugaboo out of the room, shall we? Yeah, Patrick and the Druids did not get along. In fact, that's actually what the story of Patrick driving the snakes out of Ireland is about, is him driving the Druids out of Ireland, which he did not do, by the way. There were still Druids after his time. There were still Druids in the time of St. Columba. There were still Druids for a while. It took a while to get them into hiding, because then you have the Bardic Schools system that kind of takes the place of the Druids and ... history. We're not going to get into all that. He did apparently preach a very exclusivist version of Christianity, and the Druids did not like him, and he did not like them. And yeah, I can see that when somebody comes in and says, hey, you need to change everything. And by the way, the people who are in power really shouldn't be in power anymore. That's going to cause strife, mainly because he was not trying to bring in an egalitarianism to Ireland. He was trying to superpose the bishops of the Roman Church for the Druids of the traditional Irish law system. And that's just replacing one thing with another, my dude. So there's strife there. I am not saying in any way, shape, or form that Patrick was ever friendly with any of the Druids. That is not the case. Now, this story about Crom Cruach, I have a lot of problems with. One, I have looked and looked and looked, and I know other people have as well. I don't know that Crom Cruach was actually an Irish god. He may have been. He may have been. We have various names for this deity. Ken Cruach, which literally means the head of Cruach. Crom Cruach means the crooked dark one in Irish Gaeilge. That's interesting. That the name of the high god of the Irish pagans was the crooked dark one. Huh. Interesting. It feels like it has a bit of the, what's the word? Propaganda to it. But there is a possibility that Crom Cruach was actually an Irish deity, possibly from the few little tidbits we have about him, maybe an agricultural god with the dark, referring to the dark fertile soil, may have been a storm god, the dark skies, may have been some combination of the two, because as we know from our studies in Irish mythology, Irish deities are rarely a thing. They have multiple domains. For goodness sakes, even Angus is a god of healing. They didn't limit themselves to one domain like we see in some very sanitized pantheons. Which again, I don't believe any pantheon was ever that clean cut that this is the god that exclusively does this one thing. At any rate, there isn't a lot of what I would feel like is good evidence for who this person was outside of stories that we find in the Christian era. There are standing stone monuments that may or may not have had something to do with Crom. Those attributions, again, we find recorded later. To my knowledge, there is not a single standing stone with Ogam that says this is Crom Cruach or dedicated to Crom Cruach or anything like that. In my research, I've never found that. If you know of any, please let me know. I really want to expand my knowledge. What I find interesting about this story is how it shows this very strong misunderstanding of how paganism works. That's more or less what I wanted to talk about today. That here he is seeing this, and the demons in the statues start shouting. Now, if you're not steeped in ancient Christianity, especially Christianity of the first 10 centuries, which is where a lot of my obsession with Christianity is, you might not know that this is actually one of the oldest saint stories. One of the oldest saint stories is about a saint who cured a girl who was possessed by a demon because she saw a statue of Venus and tried to take the same pose that the statue was in. You know how kids are. You see a statue standing weird or a picture of somebody standing weird, and the kid just tries to stand like that. And in standing like that, she summoned this demon of Venus into her body, and it started tormenting her and her family until the good bishop showed up, and the holy healer cast out the spirit. And when they cast out the spirit, the statue fell in the temple and shattered because the demon was cast into the pit of hell. And then everybody applauded, I guess.
If any of it actually worked like that.
Right. These stories are propaganda.
Having lived through the satanic panic of the 80s, for me, it's very reminiscent of that. You still see these stories. Oh my gosh, they touched an Ouija board, what was it, Parker Brothers game set?
I think it's Mattel, but I can't remember.
Oh, Mattel. I couldn't remember.
No, it's Hasbro.
Company, but
I think it's Hasbro.
Or Hasbro. Okay,
it's a toy company.
Yeah, it's like saying they pulled out Monopoly, or they played Shoots and Ladders, and now they're possessed by demons.
Yeah, it's
Shoots and Ladders has snakes in them.
It really is Satanic Panic 1.0. I see that in the story of then everybody applauded and converted to Christianity right away because the epic rap battle of history was won by St. Patrick. And he dropped the mic so hard the statue shattered.
And then he went and performed at the Super Bowl.
This is just not a proper understanding of how statues and stuff work. I say this as somebody who is currently surrounded by statues. I have them all around me. And I have holy images on the walls all around me because that's how we decorate our house, because we're that kind of people. I don't know of a society or a culture that believes that the entire essence of a being exists in a statue.
A quick caveat along with that, the only things I could think of that might technically apply would be if it were anchored or imprisoned in, and thus breaking would do the opposite of, it would free it so it could go wherever it wants. It wouldn't destroy it or anything. Like, it's an object.
Remember, most of the accounts we have of the Romans interacting with the Celtic people are either in Roman Britain or in Gaul. The Romans, I'm not going to say never made it over to Ireland, but really didn't have a lot of experiences over in Ireland. So we don't really have a lot of firsthand Roman accounts of what happened in Ireland. The reason that's important is, as we know, the ancient Irish did not write anything down. But even the Romans, what they did write down, a lot of it was propaganda. But what we know from their writings about the Gaulish Celts and the Brythonic Celts, those in Britain, they marveled at their lack of statues, that they did not have statues, that the Romans were all about, here's our statue of our god. And in fact, the vast majority of statues that we have of any of the deities are from the Roman period, when they had already been conquered by Rome. So they were adopting Roman customs and starting to carve these statues, these images. In fact, the Greeks also talk about this as well, about a couple hundred years earlier, that the Celts did not have statues. They actually thought that they were barbarians because they believed their gods existed in nature, free roaming like deer, that they didn't have houses and like good homes like in a temple or something. Like they're just crazy. Their gods just roam about. They could be anywhere at any time. How crazy is that? So while it is not impossible that the Irish did have statues, it is highly likely that they did use standing stones, because in both Ireland and in Britain, there were these standing stone altars that were primarily built by an earlier culture that we do not know really much about. The standing stones were originally built in the Northern Islands, and then the spiritual technology migrated south. The oldest stone circles are actually well in the islands to the north, and then slowly moved down the islands to the ones that we know today. So we know very little about that stone building culture. We do know that when the Celtic peoples moved into the areas, they often mythologized these places and incorporated them into their beliefs and often into their practice as well. So it's not impossible to think that they worshipped at stone circles. It's not impossible to think that they may have erected standing stones in their temples. It feels rather out of character to say that they had these idols, because remember, the statue that he's talking about is not actually made of stone in most of the stories. It's a golden statue of Crom surrounded by brass statues of the other gods. That sounds much more like something you would find in Greece or Rome or parts further east than what you would find in the Celtic world.
Let me shift your focus for a minute and try to help recontextualize this, at least for a segment of our audience. This would be, for instance, for all of the Christians, all the different Christians have crosses, statue. Okay. So it would be like a non-Christian going, we broke their cross, therefore the one Jesus is now defeated or destroyed or driven off because we broke a single cross or one cross. Like for all the Christians out there that have the statue, the cross in their life, and probably many of them about here, there, and yonder, like Jesus isn't in that one cross. Like breaking or destroying that one cross wouldn't get rid of it. It's hopefully a way to help each individual to understand the context better, since it's something less foreign, because it's something that's in, at least for those that have crosses in their lives, or they have that.
To my knowledge, we've never found a golden statue where that was depicting a Celtic deity.
Yeah, and the Greeks and Romans were very big on statuary, and very big on, if you don't have that, you're not a civilized society. And we have lots of writings from them about those peoples not being civilized and all because they don't have statues.
I find the story so strange for that reason, but also in what it's saying. Christianity in its early years had several factions in it, and the one that gave rise to the unjust hierarchy of bishops, which outside of the writings of Pseudo Paul, there is no semblance that the early Christian movement wanted to have bishops and priests. It's a weird superimposed Roman idea that gets placed onto the early Christian movement from the outside and justified by the writings of Pseudo Paul, especially in 1st and 2nd Timothy, that actually give instructions on how to pick your bishops and your deacons and imposes an ecclesiastical order. In fact, in the book of Hebrews, we are told that we have no priest but Jesus, that Jesus is our one and only high priest, and that every believer is a member of the order of Melchizedek, and that we are all priests. Peter, in his writing, says that we are all priests, that everyone is a priest, that there's not just a priestly class in Christianity anymore, that we all have that close, intimate relationship. I see this story as trying to do two things with it. And one is showing the power of a bishop. It's trying to show the importance of the office of a bishop, because I do believe by the time this story happens, he is an ordained bishop at this point and not just a priest. But even if he is a priest, you still had to justify the existence of a Christian priest, because that really doesn't become widely accepted until about the 10th century. Like they exist, they're everywhere, but there are still a lot of Christian groups going, yeah, that's nice little ornamentation you have over here. We're going to keep practicing the way over here without you. The full hegemony of the church really doesn't come until later. But this is a story trying to tell us more about St. Patrick than it is about the Irish, that it's the importance of his office, the importance of his role, and the power that comes through that institution to crush and destroy a people. And unfortunately for the storyteller, I think that it doesn't convey the story in the way that it wants to. It's supposed to show Patrick saving Ireland from the demon god of Crom Cruach, who, again, if he was a traditional deity in Ireland, was probably related to either fertility rites or to like storms or something like that, and not whatever Patrick thought he was in the story. Because again, the story never happened, but it's trying to show that institutional importance. And I wanted to bring this up on St. Patrick's Day because we're going through this right now, where a lot of stories are being told that may have a kernel of truth, right? There may have been a devotion to Crom Cruach. There may have been these circles of standing stones that were used. Of course, in the story we're talking about, they're generally pedestals with metal statues on top, but there's a kernel of truth that if you didn't know better, you might be able to think, oh, that's what those standing stones were for. They were pedestals for statues. Got it. They're stories that are designed to get people to obey in advance the imperial decisions and edicts of those that deem themselves to be your superiors and your betters. That is the point of this story. You should obey the Roman Catholic Church in this case, or whoever's telling the story, because here is the power of the office of our priesthood and the power of the office of our bishops, that they could say a word and shatter stone and metal. Do you want them saying those words to you? Because you're softer and squishier than stone and metal. This isn't a story so much about defeating the gods of Ireland, because again, if it were, it probably would have been one of the more popular gods. Because again, if this was a practice, it was probably a localized practice. Because again, we don't have any stories surviving about Crom Cruach.
So I'm over here laughing, going, "Oh no, they had enough sense not to get mouthy with the Morgan."
But no, but that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, but yeah, to your point, yeah.
This isn't a story about the Morgan, the Dagda, about Macnan and Maclure.
Yeah.
This is a story about Brigid or Oma or Lou, that we know that there was devotion to. We know that there were these strong devotions to. We don't see there. It's not about the faith. It's about the power of the institution. And this is, to me, the power of Druidry, is learning to see what the magic is in the story. What is the spell the story is trying to cast, so that we understand what spell is trying to be cast over us. This story of Patrick and Crom Cruach is a story about how we should submit and obey to their hegemonic authority, because they will crush and destroy us if they do not. I think the only way to respond to that is using your hands in the gestures made famous in the United States. Give them the gift of Angus's birds, because you don't just obey in advance. You never obey in advance.
Also, hashtag your God's so weak. Like you said, even in the context of the story, they went after this weird one-off. And you'll see that over and over again in other stories too, where someone will try to put themselves up as being so strong, yet in the story, they're beating up somebody so weak, so small. Something we've talked about before with imperialism and all. They need an enemy, an opposing faction that is scary enough to make everyone go, ooh, scary, but weak enough that can be crushed with one flick of the finger. We talked about this when we talked about Rome and their persecution of the Jewish people in Israel, Christianity and Judea.
No one could have stood up to the full might of Rome, especially with that many legions being sent in. Of course, propaganda is written to show what a terribly devious and powerful nation they secretly were, but that we were able to easily crush and destroy because, oh, we're even more powerful than they were. That's what I think is the propaganda value in a story like this. If you don't understand, like, I love St. Patrick. I've done episodes about St. Patrick in the past. I love the life of St. Patrick. I think that there's some interesting things in his story. I think that he is an interesting person in that he was somebody who was enslaved at a young age, who fought his way to freedom. I think that there are lessons we can learn from St. Patrick. And this is not me just denigrating everything about him. I think with any story, when we're presented with it, we have to make sure that we're looking at the magic that is in that story, because all stories carry magic with them. And this particular story is trying to cast a spell of imperialism. It is trying to get you to cede your power and your authority to others who deserve your love, devotion, and submission. With a word, they can shatter stone. They can break metal.
Which also makes me giggle because I sit back and I go, oh, yeah?
Do it.
As we covered last week in the Druidcraft Magic episode, I could use making magic and take a sledgehammer and do the same. I'll crush that stone to rubble too. Wow, that's a powerful spell I have. Hold my might.
And we see the story of Crom Cruach playing out all over the country still to this day. The last time they tried to put up 10 Commandments monuments around the country, the Satanic Temple, in a move of sheer and utter brilliance, made a statue of Baphomet teaching the children, which, so beautiful. They're like, well,
magic and stories. Or magic.
Here, this has to be here too, because we're going to have from all the faiths, right? And you see these people looking at the statue, and why God will destroy the statue. Well, I didn't see lightning strike that statue. Remember the story, the fight against the priests of Baal that you find in the Bible, Elijah and the priests of Baal. One, I don't think that that's actually a story about Elijah. I'm just going to put it to you right now. That is a propaganda story that is writing on the legend of I do think that there was a historical Elijah. I think that we do see some of his stories maintained in scripture. This is an imperial story that is added on to try to make him seem like he was part of the imperial cult, because the reason there was a fight between Elijah and the prophets of Baal, and that's an important term there, the prophets of Baal, not just the priests of Baal, but Baal had prophets too. The reason there's a fight between them and they have this magic duel is because at this point, Adonai, Jehovah, is superseding. Baal was the traditional storm god of the region. Adonai was a storm god who came in from Midian and from parts south and was taking the place of Baal, supplanting Baal from the divine pantheon and eventually merging with El to become the one and only supreme god. This is the actual story that's taking place here, is this storm god has to show that they're more powerful than that storm god, because you should no longer believe in that storm god. You should believe in our storm god. That's the story that's being told there. And it is part of the Davidic cult that was trying to make sure and maintain that there was one temple and that they had absolute control over it. That's the story that's being shipped here. That's the packaging that this is being put in, this one imperial cult that prides itself on going around and destroying all of the other temples to God in that book. But the story of the prophets of Baal becomes this archetype for all of these stories that follow. The story I was telling you about the statue of Aphrodite, right? They didn't hit it with hammers in the story. They said a word and God smote it and cracked it and broke it down, because the imperial god is stronger than anything that you will find in nature. We actually know from the archaeology that they would hit them with hammers. We have the statues that they broke. They hit them with hammers. They knocked their faces off, and they specifically blinded them because they didn't want the statues to see what they were doing. We want to talk about who are the superstitious people here.
Yeah.
Who are the superstitious people here? The ones that are blinding the statues so that they can't see you vandalizing them, or the people that were worshiping in that temple just minding their own business? One of these groups of people is superstitious.
It's like that mouthy person shouting fighting words at somebody as they're getting into their car and driving away quickly, or running into their house and locking the door. Dude, you're talking really aggressively and running in the opposite direction.
So as you're celebrating, I think there's so many wonderful things that you can celebrate about Patrick and St. Patrick's Day, and make sure to have yourself some nice Irish stout, have yourself a really nice whiskey today, if you can. It's great ways to celebrate St. Patrick and even to remember his stories and whatnot. It's a great day to say the Lorica if you haven't already. Just remember, they later added all of the things about witches into it, so you can drop that part, because that prayer actually predates Patrick and its attribution to Patrick, and was originally a Druidic prayer that just called on the animals. It originally just called on the deer and the salmon, the hawk. Things get imperialized. But always remember, when you're telling and retelling these stories, or you're having these stories told to you for the first time, look at what the story is really telling you. You can still enjoy the story. I love the story of Patrick versus Crumb Crook. It's a great fantasy epic. Like, I love that. He walks in and the statue starts talking to him and he hears the other statues hissing, and it makes him for a great scene in a movie or a television show, right? But again, that's the point, is originally not to be entertained. I am entertained by the story. I think it's funny. I think it's entertaining. I think it would, again, be beautiful in a movie. But I reject the idea that we should automatically submit to the bishops because they are that much more powerful than us.
It is important to be able to laugh, because part of the power and the magic in the stories can easily be dispelled once you see that drive for imperialism and are able to laugh at it like it's a farce. Take that imperial power out of it. Hashtag your God's so weak.
Oh, so weird. But anyway, happy St. Patrick's Day.
Happy St. Patrick's Day.
As we're heading out today, I would love to know what your opinions are about this. Have you heard the story of Crumb Crook before? Have you heard any other versions of this Prophets of Baal story? Because it is something that reappears all the time. There's a wonderful version of this that involves Charlemagne, where he literally cut down Yggdrasil, which would be weird because we actually just live in the bowels of Yggdrasil, which meant he crawled down to the bottom and then destroyed the world. But I guess we're not supposed to think about it too hard. But there are a lot of versions of this story. He also cut down Yggdrasil with one swing of his sword. So I would love to know what your favorite version of the story is. Have you heard the story before? What do you think about it? How are you using the magic that we've learned to unpack the secret spell that's within all of these stories that they're trying to cast on us? If you're listening to us on YouTube or Spotify, you can leave the comment right there. If you're listening to us anywhere else, even if they say that you can leave a comment, they don't let us know. So head on over to creationspast.com, click on chat, and you can leave a comment there, and we will be able to see it and get back to you. Or you can leave it on the post for this episode, whichever you want to do. While you're there, you have a few dollars you can toss our way. We offer monthly and annual memberships. You can also support us on Patreon or Ko-fi. I am C.E. Dorset on both. Or you can support us through the Cash App hashtag Creations Pass. Thank you so much to everybody who does that. You all really mean the world to us. You help us keep the lights on, keep a roof over our head, and food on the table. If we've ever said or anything that's helped you or you think would help somebody else out, please send it to them. That helps us out more than you know. And as we're on our way out, Crumb Crook, can you hear me? Are you there? Should we be remembering you with the others? I would love to know your story. Did you ride on the clouds with lightning like Nuada? Were you deep in the earth like Taichu? Who were you? Open our eyes so that we may remember the old ways and the old stories and see past the propaganda that tells us how evil and dark you were. Amen.
Amen.